Welcome to this episode of the Context Podcast by Geist. I'm your host, Martha Zink, and this is where we get to talk about whatever is going on in the Claris and FileMaker world. While I was off visiting a client, Ernest Koe and Todd Geist took over, joined by Dominik Keller from Five and Jonathan Marcus from Sureguard. In this episode, they talk about extending an existing FileMaker system with a React-based UI, using OData to bridge technologies, and the importance of enterprise-grade security for the medical industry.
Hey guys, so today we have some really interesting things to talk about with Jonathan Marcus and Dominik Keller. Dominik, you're with Five.co. Did I get it right? How do you?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a small software company called Five. That's right.
Awesome. And we'll get to some of the interesting things you're doing with Five, and we really want you to kind of share with us what you're doing with it. But briefly, turning over to you, Jonathan, can you quickly talk about your background? You're a longtime FileMaker developer, and
Sure, yeah. I basically was introduced to FileMaker back in 1998 when I was working in the summer camp business. I was working for a camp that had a very unique programming style at the time. Since then, they've actually had a lot of copycatters who've taken advantage, but really it was all powered by FileMaker because of the custom ability, ease of use, and things that we're also used to, why we got into FileMaker in the first place. So I had kind of just been working in a number of positions where FileMaker wasn't my primary role, but it was always my sort of go-to tool to solve the problems that I needed to solve on behalf of the company that I was working for. And ultimately, over time, I decided that really I enjoyed that aspect of whatever job I was at, more than the actual job I was hired to do. So I decided to kind of give it the leap of faith and make FileMaker my full-time endeavor. So from there, I had been doing some contract work but doing some just kind of working with some of my own clients, but primarily I've been working with Sureguard and that's how we came to this project that we're talking about today and working with Five.
Yeah, so Jonathan, would you maybe give us some context? So what was the problem that you ran into, and how did you and Dominik wind up working together?
So the context is that the problem that we were faced with was that we wanted to build a solution for a company where the majority of the users were company employees. They were, so essentially could be a little bit, the client is a medical company and the file is an insurance verification solution. So essentially they would have our client has their client, who are the medical providers, fill out information on their patients, and they send it to a third party for verification before they commit to doing the procedures. But all of the
was this all on paper, or was it?
No, they had been using some other portals, or a portal. However, it was not stable, and they were really trying to improve it. They were very security conscious, and they wanted to make sure that they had something that was really buttoned down. And so from my perspective, I wanted something that, obviously I didn't want to use WebDirect because I knew that this, it would be too clunky for them. I love, WebDirect has come a long way. It has, I use it a lot, but in this particular case, I just knew that the glitches that you kind of see from time to time with WebDirect were not going to be satisfactory to this particular client. So I wanted to find a different option, and I thought about using a platform like some of the other options. I don't know if I'm allowed to get into names.
Yeah.
Sure, anything. Yeah.
Like FM Better Forms is the one that came to mind initially because they're pretty popular in the industry, and so I looked at them pretty closely and had considered them. But while I was doing that, I somehow stumbled across Five on, I don't remember exactly, but it was basically like, wow, here's a company that does almost all the same things, and they're kind of, I just offered, the pricing seemed more favorable, I guess, and it just seemed like a neat fit, or a possibility anyway. So I reached out to them, and they had told me about a client that they had that was using FileMaker, and they allowed me to connect with that client. And it was a school that had some similar kinds of things that we were doing, and I thought this is great, and so we decided to go that route, and that's how we got there.
So, yeah, Dominic, I remember you reaching out to me maybe a couple of years ago now, just kind of out of the blue. I think it was a cold call or some sort. And that kind of blew you off. I was like, just one of those web guys trying to get my time. And you were pretty persistent, if I recall correctly. And then I think Jonathan somehow. You came into the picture and said, "Hey, I'm building this thing with Five," and it's like, "Wait, that Five with Dominik? we got to talk about this." I don't remember clearly like that whole story.
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
So let me give you the background story on Five, and then how we
Absolutely.
came to be inside the FileMaker community.
Right.
So we started Five back in 2020 with the intention to accelerate software development. We're a team of 3 co-founders, myself, Mark, who's the product architect, and Jason, our CTO. And Mark and Jason have been doing software their entire lives. And they've been building software, and they thought there's got to be a better way to build web applications. And that's how we started Five. We didn't know about low-code or no-code at that time. We didn't know about FileMaker. All we knew it was that we wanted to build a product that makes it easier and faster to build web applications. Now, as we started sort of going into that journey, we discovered that we need to ask the question of who's building custom software applications in this world. And naturally, you're going to land on the FileMaker community at some point of your research. Because I'd say of all of the custom software tools that have been in the market or that are out there, FileMaker probably has the most loyal and dedicated community of developers that I've come across. So that's when I started engaging with the FileMaker community, reaching out to FileMaker developers by cold email. I think it was a cold email that you would have received from me.
Yeah.
And a lot of FileMaker developers were keen to see a demonstration of Five simply because they said, all right, I've been working with the same tool for a long time, but I know technology has evolved, and I'd be keen to see what else is out there. And that's when we started getting into discussions with FileMaker developers on potential projects. Now, oftentimes these projects were supplementary to FileMaker or complementary to what is already out there. So the use case that Jonathan just described, that's something that's very typical for us. We meet FileMaker developers that have developed an internal application that's used inside a business. But the question then is, how can I give external users access to some of that data that's stored inside my application? Jonathan was mentioning a music school application. That's indeed one of the FileMaker developers we've worked with. That application is used inside music schools for administration purposes, but the students never had access to any of their timetable or scheduling data. So what they wanted was a simple portal where students and parents could log in to see what's going on next week and where they'd have to go for their music classes. And that in turn led us to publish an article on our website about integrating with the FileMaker data API. And I believe that's how Jonathan, how you found us, in fact. I think it must have been a Google search. I might be wrong on this, but I think that was the case. You would have stumbled across that article where we're outlining that approach and how to make that happen inside of Five. Five essentially gives you the ability to connect to any API endpoint, whether it's FileMaker or anything else. Doesn't matter. And you can treat that as a data source inside the application development process. Now, after that, Jonathan connected with the FileMaker developer that we worked with on this particular project, and that's how things got started. And I believe that's also when our discussions with you, Ernest, and also with you, Todd, became a bit more involved technically, because it was actually Todd who guided us away from the FileMaker data API towards the OData connector, which for this particular use case that we were working on with Jonathan was actually a much better solution.
Yeah, maybe I should just take a minute to sort of outline the alternatives here, like what are the other ways you could solve this problem, so that you can kind of see where the unique capabilities of Five and FileMaker together work. So Jonathan just mentioned something about WebDirect, and I think if you've used WebDirect for a long time, you know that you can make it work pretty well, but really it's not going to feel like a web application to people who are not used to it, right? They're not going to be able to do certain things like, oftentimes Command R. You want to refresh your web page. You Command R, or Control R in a browser. Well, that's going to cause you to log right out of the WebDirect session. There's no real back button. You can't go back into in a WebDirect app. So although it works, and we've worked with customers that deploy it wildly or widely across the world, it has its advantages, but it does not feel like a native web app, and so it's always going to feel a little odd for people that maybe only have to come to this thing once a year. They're going to have to sort of readjust to those things. So WebDirect works, but not for these kinds of cases where you've got people coming in and they may only interact with it occasionally, so they don't get to learn its tweaks or its quirks. And so then you're left with the other option, which is basically build something custom using a typical web stack. Like we do this quite often in our services division. We build web apps with like Next.js and React, but you can use PHP, you can use Python, you can use all those tools. But now you're in the land of pure custom software. And yes, it works, and we do it all the time, but it is a whole different level of commitment to that process of learning how to code or getting a team that can code and all the stuff that goes along with that. There are a few other alternatives that do something similar to like what Five has done, or there's FM Better Forms, as Jonathan mentioned. And so that's kind of the landscape, is that you either have to build something custom, or you have to do WebDirect, or you have to look for something like what Five does. And that's really the deal, which is you can use a much more low-code approach to building custom web applications that people that outside of a FileMaker-driven business or organization can actually use and integrate really well with that FileMaker data. And so that's something that we are very interested in at Proof. So when it came up, let's talk to these folks at Five, let's see what they're doing. That's kind of where we got into the conversation and got into the technical aspects of how to connect to a FileMaker database really well. And so that led us to recommend OData, which I think turned out to be a really good choice for you guys at Five, because it just has a lot more capabilities in the data API. And you don't have to do as much building on the FileMaker side to just make the Five side work, right? And so that's kind of where we are. And OData is a great connector for these kind of things, because you're not dealing with layouts. You're connecting straight to the table occurrences on the graph. You don't have to put fields on a layout. You don't have to build layouts. You can just look at the tables, and that makes it easy for Five to do things like make drag and drop interfaces where you can drag out fields. I don't know if maybe Dom, you want to explain a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, so originally Five was actually designed to be a sort of a full stack development environment, and it came with its own MySQL database. And then as the product evolved, we realized that oftentimes there is data stored somewhere else already. So not everyone wants to use a MySQL database and create it from scratch, right? Which is why we added these connectors into Five. One being just an external database connector, or using something like REST or OData. Now, in the case of something like the project with Jonathan, one of the requirements from a technological point of view, but you could probably speak much better about that, Jonathan, than I do, was that we were not supposed to store any data whatsoever. That was very important. When we had previously developed the portal on top of the FileMaker data API, we actually created some mirror tables inside our MySQL database that would temporarily store data from the API, so that we can then go ahead inside of Five and write plain vanilla SQL and actually query that data from inside our database. But of course, as I said, that means you temporarily have to store that data in your own database. Now, if you want to get around that, that's where OData really comes in. OData gives us the ability to do much more with the data in terms of interacting with it. We can obviously, we can find all records or individual records, we can modify records, we can trigger scripts inside of FileMaker, We can even send JPEGs or PDFs from File 5 into FileMaker, or display what's stored inside the FileMaker database inside of the 5 web interface. So there's a bunch of stuff that we were able to do with OData. And again, we're actually not storing anything at all, except a few user credentials that temporarily need to be there for authentication purposes. But that's it.
Yeah.
Everything else is purely based on the connection.
So another thing to say about OData for people in the FileMaker world listening to this who maybe haven't looked at it and maybe only familiar with the REST API is that OData was designed to essentially replace ODBC or SQL over REST, essentially. In fact, OData is, they actually say on there, if you go to the OData site, I think it says the best way to rest is what it says is their tagline, because it is, I mean, the definitions of REST, there is a formal definition. Most people do not implement the formal definition of REST, but so it's a little bit loose. But OData is over HTTP, and it uses essentially the same basic standard as REST and how it works to do CRUD. But it has a lot of querying capability. So the same kind of SQL-like statements you can do to get joins across tables and select only certain fields and do very complex queries, you can do all that with OData. Stuff that is actually quite challenging or impossible to do with the REST API inside of FileMaker. So that lets you be very specific. Like when you make a request to using OData to a FileMaker database, you can decide to get only one field for every record in the table. You can't do that with REST. You're going to have to make a new layout and put the one field on it to do that, right? And so every time you need a new set of fields, you have to make a new layout with different sets of fields. And this actually becomes important when you're dealing with performance, because sometimes for certain kinds of queries, you do not want a lot of fields because they may just too much data. They may be very slow. They may be unstored calcs that you want to get or things like that. So you definitely don't want to expose all fields to your REST query because you're going to take the hit for that. But with OData, you don't even make layouts. You can just say, I want these 3 fields from this table. I don't want any others. And you can do that at the time of creating the query, which for something like 5 is critical, because now 5 can give you all of the UI and the help in building those queries, right? So
yep.
I think that's turned out to be pretty well. In fact, are you generally supporting OData now as another data source, or is it just for FileMaker?
Yeah, exactly. No, it can be anything. That's a nice thing about OData. Yeah. So when we looked at it, and it's supported by a lot of different ERP systems. I think it was originally developed by Microsoft, right. So it obviously also goes hand in hand with the entire Dynamics ERP stack and everything. And it's generally supported. And as you just said, Todd, the nice thing about it is that it's fairly easy to implement. Reading an OData query is a little bit like reading a standard sort of API request, your get and post and put methods, plus a little bit of SQL behind it. So it's, for our developers coming in and trying to understand how that works, it's a very well-documented standard. If you can read SQL, which is probably one of the most readable, programming languages that's out there anyway. I mean, you don't need to know programming to be able to read an SQL query, and you don't need to know programming to kind of understand what's happening inside of OData either. And FileMaker also has pretty good documentation on it. So if you're trying to understand, how to implement some of these methods, or how to get a certain record, or how to add a filtering, add filtering to HTTP request, it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah. Jonathan, I want to ask you to get to some of this in a minute, but I'm curious. Maybe you both know the answer to this. So there are a few quirks with FileMaker, a few things you gotta be. I wouldn't say they're quirks necessarily, but for example, something that really just sort of like kind of seemed a little odd to me when I first got into it. Is there a keywords like ID, which which has to be treated differently in the OData queries? You have to, if your primary key is named ID, it has to be quoted, and so that can, if you're going to make raw OData queries by hand, you have to know some of these things. I think that's actually part of the spec, but it's so common for FileMaker folks to make their primary key fields named ID, capital I, capital D. That really threw me. And there's also, you might have some, for people who are thinking about doing this, you might want to clean up your naming conventions for your tables and fields. It might make it easier. You know, things like spaces and weird characters in your table names and your field names can be problematic or harder to deal with for OData. So I don't know if you guys, maybe you've worked around that just by escaping everything properly in your back end, but that's definitely an issue in some of the things. We get, somebody comes in with an old FileMaker system and we want to try to build OData on it. Sometimes we have to go in and just be like, we're going to clean up all these names because otherwise we're just going to be fighting against you know, weird field names or things like that. So, but yeah, it's pretty cool. The other thing I should say is that it's actually faster than REST as well for a number of reasons. So it just turns out to be, it's the best way to get data in and out of FileMaker, really. It turns out to be that.
Yeah, Jonathan, what was your experience with it? I mean, you were pretty new to OData and Five as kind of a stack, right? I mean, how did you navigate that? Yeah.
Well, in my experience, I don't know if it's the typical experience of other FileMaker users with Five, because I really had the need for some more custom development beyond what was included in their standard platform. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the programming that was used for the OData really was done on their end with their development. So I just had to, you know, basically provide the field names and things along those lines and tell them, you know, what are the keys I need passed back and that kind of thing. And I just, you know, I mean, having the as far as the naming conventions go, that is sort of beyond Five. I mean, excuse me, beyond OData. It's just kind of just generally a good thing anyway. Just because, yeah. I mean, even execute SQL and so forth like that. I mean, other like you can even script names, you know, that have spaces become problems and so forth. So yeah. So anyway, going back to your question though, so. There's definitely, I gotta say, there's definitely a learning curve that that it was with Five. So it's not something you're just gonna kind of pick up instantly. It took a little bit of time, and I'm still learning about it, you know, every day really. But it's pretty cool how they were able to adapt a what they call a plugin. It's different from how we refer to plugins in FileMaker, but they were sort of had a plugin so that, I guess it's a JavaScript or React-based plugin, so that they were able to present the interface in a way that that we wanted to have, and to handle all of the things that went beyond the standard form filling that really is, I think, the primary focus of where the Five platform, you know, is designed for.
Yeah, just jumping in here.
Yeah,
so Five, the way the product is designed, and I think I sort of mentioned it at the beginning when I briefly mentioned low code and no code. And if you take low code and no code at two ends of a spectrum, where no code is here and low code is here, and that's how I look at it, by the way, Five is very much low code. So we're not trying to eliminate code. We give you some no-code features, and I think that's a similarity that we have with FileMaker. You can write an application, you can write a CRUD application with authentication without writing any code whatsoever. But once you get into more complex workflows, you can actually write JavaScript, TypeScript, or SQL right inside of Five. So the scripting layer comes back in. And for us as a company, when we started out in this, you know, low-code, no-code industry, our intention was always to give people a tool that's flexible and extendable.
Yeah.
So you can think of Five as really implementing technologies that a standard full-stack developer would use in a web application project.
Right.
Meaning on the user interface side, Five actually implements Material UI, which is a React library for creating user interfaces.
Yep.
And that gives us the flexibility to then turn something like what Jonathan had inside of FileMaker, which was a very custom interface with a certain workflow inside of it, into a proper web application using standard React components that are written inside of JavaScript. There is indeed a learning curve, I'd say, if you come from FileMaker and you're not familiar with JavaScript. That's something you'd have to learn. The nice thing about it is there's nothing proprietary in it. So for all intents and purposes, you could even write a lot of code that goes into Five with ChatGPT if you needed to.
Right.
I've done that myself because ChatGPT knows about JavaScript, TypeScript, and SQL very well. And there's no Five programming language in that sense.
Right.
So yes, there's a learning curve, but everything sort of the time that you'd invest learning Five, that'd be time you'd have to invest into going into a full stack approach as well, because it's just standard plain vanilla technology.
Can we
So-
flesh? I'm sorry, Ernest. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, can you programmatically generate Five components now with chat? Can you say, hey, I need a form, I need, it's got to do these things, and here in the field. What are your thoughts on that?
Not yet, not fully,
On the
because
roadmap.
ChatGPT doesn't, no AI knows Five as well as it would need to know all of that. There are certain things that you would have to take from the Five API. So essentially, you can interact with anything that exists inside of Five through code. You could go five.form.field to interact with the field, for example. But for that, AI would have to understand that this API exists. That is not the case just yet, but that's indeed where we'd like to get to, so that you can interact with Five in a more natural language-like way, and you can generate the code that you would need to build your application.
I just wanted to flesh that out because I don't think I fully understood that. I think I knew that JavaScript, you could write JavaScript, but I don't think, or I'm forgetting, that you could actually build custom React components. So did I understand that right, that these are plugins that you can build and install on your server? That's interesting.
Yep.
So I just to separate that out a little bit for folks who are listening. What I remember when we were looking at this and going through the Five interface when you first connected OData up, is that they're actually, I think you can generate, based on the table alone, you can get like a sort of a scaffolded view, that actually works, interacts with the data. So that kind of CRUD stuff, table, list view, detail views, is just kind of there because you know the fields, you know the tables, so you can create that. And so and then you've got some UI tools that you can build on top of that, right? And then if you can't find anything within the application itself, you can learn or go out and try to find some kind of plugin or some React code that can fill that need.
That's correct.
That's pretty powerful, and I think the world has picked React. Some people would say for better or worse. We happen to like it quite a bit, and it's turned out to be really great for the AI coding tools. Like Claude, actually, I like to use Claude for coding as opposed to ChatGPT. But when you ask it to generate a React component, it actually can run it. It'll show it to you on the right side, and it'll actually show you the running React app right there as it builds it out, which is pretty cool. And that will also make it easier for you to build AI features into it, because all you have to teach it is what are the Five hooks to it. How does Five, how do you wrap? Like I would imagine, because so a little more background, in the FileMaker world, we sort of have the same thing. If you want to build something that doesn't exist in the FileMaker layout space, your options are to go to WebDirect. I'm sorry, to use the web viewer. And we've done that. Actually, the ones that there are web viewer based components in FileMaker today, and those were built by our team for Claris. So we have a lot of experience in doing that, and we built it for other companies too. We come in and we will rebuild a layout, for example, with exactly the way they want it done, in a way that just can't be done inside of FileMaker. So it's very much the same principle, and I think it's a very good one, that you help people get started, you get them moving towards their goal, but at some point having an escape hatch is absolutely essential, because you don't want people to get to a point and then just top out, and they cannot use your product to complete their goals. That is a problem. So I think it's super smart that you have that capability built in.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies in our industry excel in building simple CRUD apps really quickly. Sort of going from database to form to data view, maybe to chart.
Yeah, charts,
maybe
tables,
to authentication. Yeah, exactly. Sort of from data to UI components, and that's something you'd find inside of Five as well. So as I said, you have a form wizard, you have a chart wizard, you can build PDF reports really easily, you can create a data view on any kind of data source really easily, You can do all of that without writing code. But those apps are usually not good enough to actually satisfy a use case inside a business, because really all you're building is a data source or storage plus UI. And that process, I think, is pretty well understood from the development community and trying to accelerate it. But the reality is, I think, for most business applications, which is the space that we're in, and the space that FileMaker is in, you then start getting into workflows. Your forms become a lot more complex. You have lookups across various different tables. You have sort of conditional logic inside your forms. You have all kinds of stuff happening. A real form that's used by a business user is so much more complex than just a form pointing to a table. And the same with data views. All of a sudden you want to add drill downs and filters, and you want to be able to dynamically send out data or generate a report that's temporarily stored and then sent out by email to someone. And those things, I think trying to abstract them away in a pure no-code type of way is very difficult, because you cannot anticipate all the different use cases that people have. And as a low-code tool, even if you say you're focused on business applications, businesses are pretty complex in terms of operations. And that's where we decided as a company to always give users that coding interface so that they can actually do whatever they need to do in writing code. Because that's just the best way to give a computer instructions is by writing code or by scripting. Yeah.
So this is actually a really interesting point, because, I think there is a movement now where FileMaker is more and more becoming used as a headless application server, right? Database server. But in the traditional days, a lot of that business logic was kind of buried in FileMaker scripts, right? And your web thing would call a FileMaker server, a script over a FileMaker server, and it would do all the heavy lifting and do all the muckety-muck and do the workflows and return all that data back to the view. What's Five's strategy? So it sounds like you're actually constructing business logic in the app itself and really using FileMaker as a headless data source. Is that what I'm hearing?
So when we started developing Five, I think we took like the classic textbook approach to application development, which is you think of an application as of consisting of different layers. I think that's what you learn, if you go into Computer Science 101, you learn about the user interface layer, the logic layer, and the data layer. Now, if you translate that into Five or to the project that we've done with Jonathan, we typically start with the data layer. And you can get a MySQL database inside of Five, or as I said, you can connect to an external database, or you can connect to anything that supports OData or REST.
Yeah.
That's it. From there on, we typically go into the user interface creation next. So you start building out a couple of forms, you start building out your data views, your charts, and things like that. Now, the clue between those two, that's where the business logic comes in. And those things at the moment, sometimes we get asked, the people would like to have a workflow builder. For us, it's more code-based, and I think that's the learning curve that Jonathan was sort of alluding to when you look at Five. Because sometimes people are a bit surprised that, we're a low-code tool, but then they see actual code.
It's a good thing.
The expectation is that, there is no more code, but as I said, I think that's not a smart approach. So yeah, we just split an application into those layers. You can find those layers directly inside our interface. And if you follow that logic and if you build the application like that, you can either use Five to build a full stack web application from scratch, or you can just use it as a front-end builder connected to a data source. So that's up to you. And that's, as I said, I think FileMaker being a really, really good tool and sophisticated tool for building internal applications, we then just come in as the front-end builder and satisfy sort of the technological needs to build the web application, which looks and feels more like a web application compared to a WebDirect. And commercially speaking, because we have a different pricing model in place where you pay a fixed monthly fee per application with unlimited end users, you can actually use us as a portal builder. And in that way, sort of I'd say we carved out a bit of a niche in this, very crowded industry and space. And that's quite a good niche to be in. And that's a use case that we can satisfy quite well.
That was a big also incentive for us too. The licensing options, with WebDirect, really weren't conducive to the volume that we're anticipating with this file. So to be able to have a workaround for that was kind of a big solution for us.
One last thing, I'd like to move on to more specifics on this particular project, but I think it might be useful to sum up, because sometimes we get questions when we have similar conversations from people. Is like, well, if I have to learn to write React or JavaScript, why do I need FileMaker, or why do I need Five? We get this all the time. And I think if you haven't built full stack apps from scratch, it might seem like, oh, it's just easy. If I know how to do JavaScript or React, I can just build a full stack app. And but the reality is very far from that. There is a tremendous amount of work that goes into building a full stack application, having things around security and authentication, and separating your layers, and using maybe version control and all these other things that you have to do to be able to do this well. It's quite complicated. So this idea that you can have basically a framework. You can think about Five maybe as a framework that has all this stuff that gets you 50 to 75% of the way there, maybe higher depending on your actual needs. And then you only have to do the heavy lifting on the parts that it can't handle. That is very different from going and having to build the entire thing from the ground up. And now you got to build, that 75% that you didn't have to really deal with in code, because Five just provides it kind of out of the box or through those low code and no code tools. Now you can just build the parts that are actually custom, actually different, maybe actually unique to your business case. That's very powerful. So
I think that's sort of why it resonates with the FileMaker community, because a lot of FileMaker developers are solo entrepreneurs who can do everything, right? They can take an application from idea to running software inside a company. And as I said, there's not many communities in this world of developers that are able to do that. Maybe the old Microsoft Access folks were similar, but there are not many left. So FileMaker sort of survived. And as I said, often when I speak to FileMaker developers, I ask them, how big is your company? And they say, just me. Yeah. But I can do everything. I can run my company, in fact. I also do the invoicing and the client meetings and everything. So yeah, it's a pretty remarkable community. And as you said, Todd, I think for a real full-stack application development project, you would look at least one front-end developer and one back-end developer, and maybe someone in charge of cloud deployment as well, because you need to figure out how the AWS or Microsoft Azure infrastructure works, plus Kubernetes and all of these different technologies that come together, which is a lot for one person to learn.
Yeah, it's not really doable. I mean, it's getting better, and certainly AI is changing the game somewhat, and smaller teams can do more, but it's still, that's always been one of the biggest wins for FileMaker, that one person could actually get quite far.
So in Five, for example, we try to give you sort of one-click deployment, so the cloud infrastructure is set up already, and if you want to run your application in a development, testing, or production environment, depending on the plan that you choose with us, you can get all three. All you have to do is click a single button, and your application comes online, and you can preview it, and you're not automatically pushing changes into production. They're separate environments, so you have that workflow built into the product, and that's just a big time saver in the actual development process.
Yeah, all important points.
Yeah, I think we didn't mention this, but the FileMaker side of this app is deployed on Automatic, right? And you guys are accessing. So there's an interesting through line here where really all the infrastructure nonsense and heavy lifting, both on the web side of things and on the FileMaker side of things, is kind of taken care of for the developer. And with Five and the FileMaker bits, you're really focusing on building the things that matter, for the business. I think that's a really compelling story. Obviously in a very complicated environment, where if you were to do this all by yourself, it's like AWS, go spin stuff up, go manage S3, all that stuff, and then
I think there's another wrinkle to this project too, is that you have, Jonathan, I'm pretty sure you have very specific security needs that are pretty important. You want to outline some of that stuff for the listeners?
I mean, obviously, since it's a medical solution, HIPAA compatibility is paramount. But this company in particular was not just HIPAA, but they really wanted to go above and beyond. And they kind of hired their own outside consulting firm that to do a security audit of a whole thing. So that's why I wanted to bring on Proof Geist, because they were able to. I knew that I could be confident in that whatever their recommendations were and their setups and so forth, that it would match the compatibility that we needed, and it would just kind of, like you said, I don't have, my knowledge is in FileMaker. It's not in that infrastructure side. So I was really comfortable going with Proof Geist on that, and it paid off because we just actually completed that audit just a few days ago, and they found nothing. There was a few informational, what they call as informational points, but it was more of like I had like a close icon on a card window that I had inadvertently left on, and it overlapped with the header, text. Had nothing to do with anything security related or anything like that. It was just a UI item. It was just a couple things.
They had to find something.
Yeah, that was like they were really cherry picking to find anything they could. But it was so. I mean, it actually, it gave us a lot of credibility with the company, with our client, saying, they really did a great job with that. They were very happy. So, and that's really all thanks to Angelo team over at Proofgeist.
Yeah, we're very proud of the. It's an enormous lift. We're SOC 2 certified, and the had you told me what it would take to go through that process when I started, I would probably say, yeah, maybe later.
Well, in fact, the auditor, they even made a comment saying that most times companies don't go as far as you guys do in your internal audits, as far as like, because you're not just looking to have someone protect your company, but also your clients' software as well. And he said that's not very common, and that's really commendable.
Well, thank you. We think it's pretty important. One of our core ideals for our platform side, which is the Automatic platform, is somewhat similar to what Five is going after. I mean, basically, we want to make developers' lives easier, and infrastructure can be a challenge. There are issues when you're running in the cloud, especially if you're doing multiple environments, dev, staging, production, those kinds of things, that just don't show up if you're running with your FileMaker server. Like I've got a little Mac Mini running over here, which is a great FileMaker server, but it's not going to run in the cloud, very well. Or I mean, it could, but you need to wrap all the things around it. And so it just became obvious to us that if people want to be able to deploy complex FileMaker solutions that had security needs, that we had to be able to do that. And it's with SOC 2, you can't just say like, hey, for this server, we're going to be SOC 2. Like you have to be SOC 2 for like the whole thing. Like it's all of our practices, all of the things that we do have to be SOC 2. So that just made it sort of obvious that we had to do it. And it's hard. It takes time, takes capital, human and otherwise. But I think it's just made us a better company in general, because now we're very clear on what we're supposed to do about anything in that realm, because we have documentation, it's audited, we have plans, we have all the protocols in place, we just know what we're supposed to do, and that makes it very easy. So we can then just say, hey, you're HIPAA compliant. We can give you that ability to, or you can now build HIPAA compliant applications on top of our infrastructure, right? Which, if you don't know how to do that, it's pretty hard. It's a pretty big challenge. And there's other regulations, compliance stuff. There's also, we have people who want to do pen tests, penetration testing on some of our other client stuff, and so we help them through that. I think it just points out, like, one of the key things that Ernest and I kind of came to a number of years ago is that if you wanted to do something in FileMaker that was big and juicy, and you wanted it to be able to work with the rest of the internet, you needed to have really good servers, and they need to be connected really well to the internet. So we think of it as this sort of server first, or one of the ways I used to say it is that the center of innovation, or it all starts on the server, because If you don't have a good server up and running with OData turned on, you can't connect from Five or anything else. You can't have webhooks coming in. You can't have web apps coming in. Five can't connect to it. None of these things can connect to it. So that's really been the heart and soul behind the Automatic platform, was to give FileMaker developers in the cloud, always running, secure platform that you can build on top of. That's what Automatic is.
Yeah, well, we absolutely love the success that this project has turned out to be. I think it's a really great demonstration of like a really vibrant, partnership and ecosystem of developers really working in sync on a pretty massive endeavor. A lot of things have to get lined up for this to go well. And kudos to you and your team, Dom, for jumping in and taking on the challenge, because I think, where are you now? You're in Kuala Lumpur and in Malaysia, and your team's in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. I'm in your former hometown.
I'm so jealous of the food that you have access to. I keep threatening to visit.
Yeah, I'm going to treat myself to nasi lemak right after this.
Oh my goodness. Potato tarik and some satay. My goodness.
Yeah, and the rest of the team is over on the east coast of Australia, in Brisbane and on the Gold Coast. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, okay, gentlemen, this was a really fun conversation, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of show notes down below. And if we missed anything, I'm sure, Jonathan, don't be shy. Let us know, and Dom, you too, and we'll make sure that the world finds out about you and the great work you guys are doing.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Context Podcast, brought to you by Proofgeist. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, and we'd love it if you shared with a friend. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or questions at hello@proofgeist.com. Until next time.